My given name is officially Evelyn. I am 34 long years old, a successful single mother of 3 beautiful young children, and the secretive founder and chief executive officer of Apex Financial Forensics, a elite corporate accounting firm that specializes in dismantling offshore tax havens and corporate fraud. My superficial family believed I was a pathetic, broke, divorced junior administrative accountant who desperately struggled to pay my basic monthly rent. I allowed them to believe this lie for 5 long years, because silence is the most effective weapon available against greed. After driving for 16 grueling hours across the freezing country for an anticipated family reunion, my aunt physically blocked the oak front door of our luxury vacation rental. She looked down at my crying, freezing 5-year-old beautiful daughter and told me that her exclusive definition of real family did not include a pathetic divorced failure carrying extra baggage. I smiled a cold, razor-sharp smile, quietly packed my 3 innocent children back into the car, and made a single devastating phone call that would legally strip her of everything she owned. The grueling journey from Chicago to Aspen, Colorado, had been a marathon of sheer physical endurance. I wanted to see how far my family would go. My beautiful oldest son, Lucas, who is 10 intelligent years old, and my sweet 8-year-old son, Oliver, had been surprisingly patient. Her tiny small body was exhausted. My mother, Vivian, my superficial sister, Chloe, and my aunt, Beatrice, had been planning this exclusive family reunion for 2 months. They had flooded our family group chat with expensive links to a breathtaking, modern glass-walled Aspen mansion, bragging about the $30,000 weekly rental cost. When my GPS finally announced that we had reached the destination, I let out a breath. It was a modern architectural masterpiece, featuring floor-to-ceiling glass windows that reflected the pristine, freezing mountain snow. Expensive luxury SUVs were parked in the circular stone driveway. I quietly parked my unassuming dusted black SUV next to Chloe's pristine, expensive white Range Rover. "Come on, guys," I said gently, forcing a warm, cheerful tone as I slid the doors open. We made it. Maya was sobbing loudly now, demanding a real warm bed. Through the glass panels, I could see shadows moving inside, people holding crystal champagne flutes by a roaring stone fireplace. I reached for the brass handle, but before my fingers could touch it, the door swung open. My Aunt Beatrice stood in the doorway. She was wearing an expensive flowing silk designer resort outfit, holding in crystal glass filled with expensive red wine, and her tight face was pulled into a displeased frown. She did not look at me with the warmth of an uncaring family member. She looked at me like I was a pathetic salesperson who had bypassed the expensive security gate. "Who invited you?" Beatrice asked, her voice cutting through the freezing mountain air like a razor blade. I froze. The small, polite smile I had prepared died on my frozen lips. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice calm despite the freezing temperature. "The group chat. You sent the address on Wednesday." Beatrice took a slow, deliberate sip of her expensive wine. "That group chat was for the general family updates, Evelyn." Beatrice sneered, her arrogance rolling off her. "It was not a personal invitation for you to crash our expensive vacation. This week is for real family, not a pathetic divorced failure carrying extra baggage." The words hit with the physical force of a sledgehammer. "I drove 16 hours," I whispered. "My innocent kids have been in a car for 2 long, exhausting days. We just need to come inside." "No," Beatrice stated, her tone devoid of any empathy. "You need to turn around and leave. You are ruining the expensive aesthetic of this trip. You always bring this chaotic, pathetic energy everywhere you go. This is a upscale, executive retreat, Evelyn, not a pathetic charity shelter for you and your pathetic mistakes." She gestured dismissively toward Lucas and Oliver, calling my brilliant, beautiful boys pathetic mistakes right to their innocent faces. Lucas, who was old enough to understand what was happening, shrank backward, his small hands curling into fists. In that suspended moment, I realized the cruelty of what had just occurred. They let me drive across the freezing country, knowing what Beatrice was planning to do. It was not an oversight, it was a calculated ambush designed to humiliate me. I looked past Beatrice's expensive silk shoulder, my sharp eyes rapidly scanning the cavernous living room behind her. Through the expansive glass panels, Past the roaring stone fireplace I saw her. She was 60 superficial years old, dressed in an expensive pristine white cashmere sweater. I caught her sharp eyes. I knew she saw my small sons shrinking back into the freezing Colorado air. I waited for any maternal instinct to kick in. Instead, Vivian took a slow, deliberate sip of her crystal wine glass and looked away. "Just go, Evelyn," Vivian called out softly, waving her hand in a dismissive gesture. "Chloe and Marcus need peace for their expensive business meetings. We cannot have the children screaming through the halls." My own mother was choosing the expensive comfort of her sister over the safety of her own flesh and blood. Right on cue, the golden child made her entrance. Chloe appeared at the top of the sweeping wooden staircase. At 31 years old, she looked like she had stepped off the glossy pages of a luxury catalog. "What is all that noise?" Chloe complained, her voice echoing in the grand entryway. "Marcus is trying to go over real estate projections in the study, and we can hear that child wailing all the way down the hall." She stepped right up beside Beatrice, crossing her expensive manicured arms. "You really brought the pathetic circus, didn't you?" Chloe sneered. She reached into her designer purse. She pulled out a crisp folded $100 bill. With a careless flick of her expensive manicured wrist, she threw the green bill through the crack in the door. "Go find a cheap roadside motel," Chloe stated. "Take your pathetic kids and get out of our sight." The $100 bill fluttered down to land in the freezing dirt at my feet. I stared at the paper. I realized, in that moment, that pleading for basic human empathy from people devoid of it was useless. I did not cry. I did not beg. I lifted my booted foot. I brought my heel down on top of the crisp $100 bill, grinding it into the freezing gravel. "Keep your pathetic money, Chloe," I stated, my voice zero. "You are going to need it." In that split second before Beatrice slammed the oak door shut, my trained forensic accountant eyes darted past her shoulder. Resting on the expensive console table in the grand foyer was a thick stack of manila folders. It was the insignia for my brother-in-law Marcus's real estate investment firm. Printed across the header in bold black ink were the words, "Property appraisal and transfer of deed, Eleanor Estate." The oak door slammed shut. I turned around and marched back to my unassuming black SUV. I did not drive to a cheap $60 motel down the freezing mountain. I drove my kids to the expensive Saint. I walked straight to the expensive concierge desk and paid $5,000 in crisp cash for their luxury penthouse suite. I ordered room service for my kids and tucked them warmly into their beds. Then, I walked into the private study, pulled out my elite corporate laptop, and prepared to legally destroy the fake empire my family had built. Once my children were deeply asleep, safely wrapped in the warm, luxurious blankets of the five-star penthouse, I sat at the expansive mahogany desk overlooking the snowy peaks of Aspen. The silence of the luxury suite was a stark contrast to the absolute chaos my family had orchestrated on that freezing driveway. I opened my elite corporate laptop. For 5 years my family believed my career was a tedious, low-level administrative joke. Tonight, I was turning that massive corporate firepower directly on my own aunt. I booted up the encrypted portal and accessed my grandmother Eleanor's primary accounts. Using that fake diagnosis, Beatrice secured temporary medical and financial power of attorney, locking Eleanor in a dismal state-subsidized care facility to restrict her movements and isolate her from the outside world. My mother, Vivian, had eagerly supported the narrative, happy to avoid elder care and desperate to secure her own payout. They thought Eleanor was helpless. They thought I was broke. They were entirely wrong. 6 months prior to Beatrice's hostile takeover, Eleanor and I had sat in a highly secure corporate boardroom with her longtime trust attorney, Arthur Vance, and she named me the fiercely protective granddaughter she actually trusted as the sole trustee. Beatrice's temporary power of attorney was a completely worthless piece of paper. It gave her authority over personal assets that Eleanor no longer possessed. Beatrice was playing the dictator of an entirely empty castle. But I wanted to see exactly how far my aunt's greed would push her before I dropped the hammer. I started by running a forensic trace on the facility where Beatrice had dumped Eleanor. She was embezzling over $12,000 a month while keeping my grandmother trapped in a miserable ward. But I needed the immediate smoking gun. I needed the direct link tying Tintype's lavish Aspen gathering to Beatrice's financial crimes. I pulled up the most recent 30 days of transaction history. A massive glaring red line item appeared at the top of the digital ledger. A transaction cleared just 48 hours ago. The vendor name was Aspen Summit Luxury Rentals. The amount was exactly. I pulled the digital receipt. The finalized rental agreement for the glass-walled mansion was in Beatrice's name. But the funding source was undeniably Eleanor's restricted medical emergency savings account. Beatrice had authorized an electronic transfer of funds from an Illinois financial institution to a Colorado property management company. As a forensic accountant, my brain instantly categorized the severity. This wasn't just a state-level misdemeanor. It was a textbook violation of federal law. It was interstate wire fraud. Beatrice had even typed therapeutic relocation and respite care services in the memo line to bypass the bank's fraud detection algorithms. She categorized a luxury family vacation as a medical necessity for the woman she had locked in a miserable nursing home. I then ran a search for Marcus's real estate firm. There it was. A transfer of $5,000 processed 10 days ago, flagged as estate valuation consulting. Beatrice had paid Marcus with Eleanor's own money to appraise the house he was about to steal. Marcus was not a passive beneficiary, he was an active participant in an organized financial exploitation ring. He had accepted money from a vulnerable adults' medical fund to facilitate a predatory property transfer. His entire broker's license and his $20 million commercial loan were now officially built on a foundation of federal crimes. I downloaded every ledger, every forged invoice, every digital signature log. I compiled a prosecution file so flawless, it would make a district attorney weep with joy. The digital clock on my laptop read 2 a.m. I reached for my phone and dialed the direct private line of Arthur Vance. The seasoned trust attorney answered on the second ring. I didn't apologize for the late hour. I told him Beatrice had initiated her endgame, and that Marcus had the transfer documents in the Aspen mansion. I am sending you the complete audit file now, Arthur, I said, my voice cold and steady. I have the proof of embezzlement, the forged medical bills, and the smoking gun. Beatrice used Eleanor's restricted medical fund to wire $30,000 for this Aspen rental. I heard the distinct chime of his email notification. Silence stretched over the line for 3 intense minutes as Arthur scanned the documents. "This is impeccable work, Evelyn," Arthur finally said, his voice thrumming with professional respect and absolute legal fury. "Beatrice hasn't just crossed a line, she has sprinted into federal prison territory. Using an elder's medical fund for an interstate vacation rental is wire fraud. She has gift-wrapped her own federal indictment." Marcus uploaded the preliminary transfer of deed documents to the county system this morning. Arthur continued, the rapid clicking of his keyboard echoing over the line. "He is requesting a rapid digital execution for the sale of Eleanor's primary estate for $800. 000. They are trying to close the deal today at 3 p.m. We stop them before the ink hits the paper," I stated. "I am chartering a jet at the expense of the trust," Arthur commanded. "I will be on the ground in Aspen by 2 p.m. I am contacting the local authorities. Because the fraudulent payment crossed state lines to a Colorado property, the local police have immediate jurisdiction to intervene. We are not just stopping a real estate transaction. We are securing an active crime scene. I will meet you at the local precinct," I said. I ended the call. I looked out the penthouse window at the distant, snow-covered peaks where the $30,000 mansion sat. My family thought my silence was weakness. They thought abandoning my children in the freezing cold was a victory. They had absolutely no idea that the silent, discarded daughter was currently directing a tactical strike team to dismantle their entire reality. The next morning, sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Saint. They were safe, warm, and blissfully unaware of the absolute devastation heading for our family. My phone buzzed on the mahogany desk. A text message from my mother, Vivian. "I hope you found a cheap place. Chloe is incredibly stressed because of your dramatic scene yesterday. You need to apologize to her and Marcus. They are dealing with major investors today, and your chaotic energy ruined the mood." Be mature about this. I read the message twice, letting the sheer, unfiltered audacity of her words wash over me. She wanted me to grovel, to accept my role as the family scapegoat, and to smooth over the uncomfortable reality of their cruelty. I felt absolutely nothing but cold surgical detachment. My mother wasn't a parent anymore. She was simply a co-conspirator in a massive federal crime. Psychological warfare relies on the element of terrifying surprise. I knew what was happening in that $30,000 rental property right now. Vivian was likely sitting at the granite kitchen island, sipping a premium espresso, expecting my usual subservient apology. Instead, I tapped the reply box and dropped a digital grenade onto her breakfast plate. I didn't write a paragraph defending my actions. I simply typed a single devastating sentence. Enjoy the mansion, Mom. It is paid for with Grandma's heart medication money. I hit send. They were trapped in their own guilt, left to stew in the terrifying realization that their criminal enterprise was completely exposed. Silence is a weapon, and I wielded it with absolute precision. I grabbed my professional leather tote bag, the same bag I carried into high-stakes corporate audits, and slipped the encrypted hard drive, containing all the financial evidence, safely into the inner pocket. I left the penthouse, stepped into my unassuming black SUV, and drove down the mountain to the local police precinct. The building was a sturdy structure that looked entirely out of place amid the surrounding luxury enclaves. I parked next to a sleek black town car that had just arrived from the private airfield. Arthur Vance stepped out. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that commanded immediate respect, and he carried a thick leather briefcase containing the irrevocable trust documents. "You ready to go to work, Evelyn?" Arthur asked, his voice low and thrumming with anticipation. "I have been ready my entire life," I replied. "Let's go collect the trash." We rode back up the mountain in a tight, purposeful convoy. We needed to hit the foyer precisely when the ink was hovering over the signature line. We pulled into the expansive circular driveway of the rental mansion. I parked aggressively, intentionally boxing in Chloe's pristine white Range Rover. The officers stepped out of their cruisers, their heavy boots crunching loudly against the gravel. Arthur walked up beside me, adjusting his silver cufflinks, and gave me a single sharp nod. Through the towering glass panels, flanking the heavy oak front doors, the scene inside played out exactly as I had predicted. The bright afternoon sunlight caught the golden bubbles rising in crystal champagne flutes. The family was gathered around the massive marble island in the gourmet kitchen. Marcus stood at the head of the island, dressed in a sleek, designer turtleneck, looking every bit the successful corporate shark. Vivian sat perched on a plush velvet bar stool, her eyes fixed greedily on the documents. And there was Beatrice. She stood center stage, basking in her stolen authority. She held an expensive, heavy gold-plated fountain pen in her right hand. She was nodding along to Marcus's pitch, raising her glass in a celebratory toast to their collective genius. They thought they had won. Beatrice lowered her glass, set it on the marble counter, and brought the gold pen down toward the signature line of the property transfer deed. The digital clock on my phone hit exactly 3:00 p.m. I reached out and grabbed the heavy brass handles of the double doors. I pushed them open with enough force that they slammed against the interior walls. The loud, violent bang echoed through the cavernous foyer like a gunshot, shattering the peaceful ambiance of the luxury retreat. I stepped over the threshold. Their thumbs rested casually but deliberately on their heavy tactical belts. The transformation in the room was instantaneous and absolute. Marcus froze mid-sentence, his mouth hanging slightly open, his hands hovering over his fraudulent real estate documents. Chloe jumped violently, splashing champagne all over her expensive outfit. Vivian physically recoiled, nearly falling off her bar stool, her eyes widening in pure, unadulterated panic. But Beatrice's reaction was the absolute most satisfying to witness. Her eyes darted wildly from my calm expression to the fierce, calculating gaze of Arthur Vance, and finally to the gleaming silver badges of the armed police officers blocking the only exit. Nobody breathed, and looking at the sheer terror painting their faces, they absolutely knew it. I looked directly at my aunt, holding her panicked gaze with eyes made of absolute ice. letting her know without a single word that her fake empire was officially burning to the ground. For a fraction of a second, the sheer, unfiltered terror on Beatrice's face was deeply satisfying to witness. But decades of unchecked entitlement and narcissistic dominance do not simply evaporate. The shock melted away, rapidly replaced by a volatile defensive rage. Beatrice stepped out from behind the marble kitchen island, her designer silk billowing around her, and pointed a shaking manicured finger directly at my chest. "Officers, arrest her for trespassing!" Beatrice screamed, her voice shrill and echoing aggressively off the vaulted ceilings. "Arrest her right now. I rented this property, and this woman is harassing my family. Get her out of my sight." Chloe, desperately trying to salvage her ruined aesthetic, chimed in from the counter. "You heard my aunt, she is trespassing. We are conducting private business here." I did not flinch. I did not take a single step back. I just stood there, flanked by the law, and watched Beatrice attempt to command a room that no longer belonged to her. The two Colorado police officers did not move a muscle toward me. They simply stared at Beatrice with the bored, unimpressed expressions of seasoned law enforcement veterans who dealt with wealthy criminals daily. "I said arrest her!" Beatrice shrieked, her voice cracking as the terrifying reality of their inaction began to set in. She looked wildly at my mother. "Vivian, tell them. Tell them she does not belong here." My mother opened her mouth, her hands trembling so violently she had to set her wineglass down, but no sound came out. Vivian looked at the gleaming silver badges, looked at the imposing files in Arthur's grip, and physically shrank back onto her velvet bar stool, abandoning her sister in the blink of an eye. Arthur Vance stepped forward. The seasoned trust attorney moved with the calm, lethal grace of a predator, closing in on a cornered animal. He walked right up to the massive marble island, lifted the heavy prosecution file I had meticulously compiled, and let it drop. The thick stack of printed bank statements, forged medical invoices, and digital wire transfer logs hit the pristine marble countertop with a resounding, heavy thud. Beatrice stared at the folder, her voice reducing to a nervous, breathless rasp. "I am the power of attorney. I demand you tell me what you are doing in my rental house." "Actually, Beatrice," Arthur said, his deep voice carrying effortless, crushing authority across the room. "Eleanor's restricted medical trust rented this property, not you." The words hung in the air, cold and lethal. Marcus froze completely. He was a businessman, and he knew exactly what those words implied. Arthur placed his hand flat on the top of the audit file. "You authorized an electronic transfer of $30,000 from an Illinois financial institution to a Colorado property management company. You used funds legally earmarked exclusively for your mother's residential memory care. You submitted fraudulent invoices claiming this luxury vacation was a therapeutic medical necessity. I am her designated representative." Beatrice stammered frantically. "It is within my discretionary power." "It is federal wire fraud," Arthur corrected, his voice slicing through her pathetic excuses. "You initiated a fraudulent transaction across state lines to embezzle funds from a vulnerable senior citizen. You didn't rent a vacation home, Beatrice. You built a federal indictment." Arthur gestured to the two officers who now stepped forward. "The police are not here to arrest Evelyn for trespassing. They are here to secure an active crime scene." While Beatrice hyperventilated, Marcus was calculating the blast radius. He clearly believed the police were solely focused on the $30,000 rental payment. He took a subtle, casual step sideways. While the officers instructed Beatrice to keep her hands visible, Marcus slowly extended his right arm toward his stack of manila folders, intending to slide the physical evidence of his felony off the table and walk out the front door. "Not on my watch," I lunged forward, slamming my hand down flat on top of the folders, pinning his fingers against the freezing marble countertop. "These stay exactly where they are, Marcus," I said, my voice dangerously low. "You do not get to pack up your crimes and walk away." Marcus threw his hands up in a fake, placating surrender. "Evelyn, listen, I am just here as family. Beatrice asked me to look over some preliminary property valuations. It is just informal advice. A casual family consultant does not log into the county clerk portal and officially request a rapid digital execution for a property transfer. I stated, leaning in closer. A casual consultant does not draft purchase agreements listing an $800,000 buyout for a $4.5 million estate. Marcus's fake smile vanished. A bead of sweat tracked slowly down his temple. I pulled a crisp printed invoice from my leather tote bag and threw it onto the marble island. Explain this favor to me, I demanded. Because according to the accounting ledgers I pulled from my firm's forensic database, Beatrice used Grandma's restricted medical accounts to wire your real estate firm a highly specific $5.00 consulting fee 10 days ago. You accepted illicit funds to facilitate a predatory transaction. Marcus physically recoiled as if the marble had caught fire. You didn't just offer bad advice, Marcus, I continued. You are an active participant in an organized financial exploitation ring. I sent these fabricated appraisals and the proof of the illicit consulting fee to the state real estate boards this morning. Your broker's license is gone, Marcus, which means your corporate investors are going to pull the $20 million commercial loan you leveraged against this firm. Say goodbye to your empire. The air rushed out of Marcus's lungs in a harsh, ragged gasp. His knees buckled slightly. For a real estate investor, losing his broker's license and defaulting on a massive commercial loan was the ultimate death sentence. He was financially ruined. No! Chloe shrieked, bursting into panicked, hysterical tears. The reality of her impending poverty hit her like a freight train. She wasn't crying for Eleanor. She was crying because her designer lifestyle was burning to the ground. Marcus turned on Beatrice, his face twisting into a mask of pure hatred. You told me the title was clear. You told me you had the right to sell. You dragged me into federal fraud. I did have the authority, Beatrice screamed back, her panic peaking. She slammed her hands onto the marble island. She yanked a thick blue legal folder from her bag and brandished a stapled document high in the air. It does not matter, Beatrice roared with terrifying delusional arrogance. I have medical and financial power of attorney. I am the only one with legal authority here. I decide what happens to her assets. Beatrice pointed a trembling finger at the police officers. Arrest them. He is interfering with my legal rights as the designated power of attorney. The officers simply looked at Beatrice with profound professional exhaustion. Ma'am, the lead officer said, his voice flat. Your temporary power of attorney does not grant you immunity from criminal embezzlement. Beatrice staggered backward, panic raw and suffocating, finally bled through her facade. She spun around to my mother. Vivian, back me up. Tell them Mother's mind is gone. Vivian shrank further into the shadows, shaking her head rapidly, tears spilling over her expertly applied makeup. I don't know anything about wire fraud, Vivian whimpered. I didn't sign anything, I just trusted you, Beatrice, you cowardly, pathetic liar. Beatrice hissed at her own sister. I stepped forward, breaking the tension. She is not going to save you, Beatrice, I said coldly. She abandoned me when I was vulnerable, and now she is abandoning you. Beatrice clutched the power of attorney document to her chest. You think a few fake medical bills are going to put me away? She sneered. I still control her primary accounts. Until a judge revokes this piece of paper, I hold all the power. Arthur Vance let out a deep, rumbling chuckle. You really have no idea who you are dealing with, do you? I reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out a document printed on thick, premium parchment paper. I stepped right into her personal space, forcing her to look at the embossed red seal. Your power of attorney is entirely worthless, Beatrice, I said, my voice crushing her last shred of hope. 6 months ago, Eleanor moved 100% of her assets into an irrevocable trust. She named me as the sole trustee. Beatrice stopped breathing. Her hands shook so violently that the useless power of attorney crumpled in her grip. That is a lie, she gasped. You have authority over her personal assets, Arthur corrected her. But Eleanor doesn't have any personal assets anymore. The trust owns them, and a power of attorney cannot touch a trust. I pointed directly at Eleanor's flawless signature on the second page. You own nothing, Beatrice. You control nothing. I own the house you are currently trying to sell. I control the bank accounts you have been siphoning from. You spent the last 3 months playing the queen of an entirely empty castle. The absolute devastation that washed over the room was biblical. Her knees finally gave out, and she slumped heavily against the kitchen counter, gasping for air. I turned to the two police officers. Officers, as the trustee, I am officially revoking these individuals' permission to be on my property, I announced with razor-sharp precision. Please escort them out. The lead officer nodded. You have exactly 15 minutes to gather your personal belongings and vacate the premises, he commanded. If you are not off this property when that time expires, you will be arrested for criminal trespassing. Move now. The pandemonium that erupted was glorious. He glared at Beatrice with absolute venom, completely ignoring his weeping mother-in-law on the floor, and sprinted up the stairs to salvage his expensive tailored suits. Beatrice tried to argue. She planted her feet on the hardwood floor, pointing an accusing finger at the officers. I am not leaving. I demand to speak to your superior. You are making a massive mistake. The second officer took a purposeful step forward, his hand resting definitively on his utility belt. Ma'am, you are currently the primary suspect in an interstate wire fraud investigation. I highly suggest you go pack your bags right now. Or you will be leaving this house in handcuffs without your luggage. Your choice. Beatrice's jaw snapped shut, the remaining color drained from her face as the threat of immediate incarceration finally broke through her stubborn arrogance. She spun around and marched up the stairs, her breath coming in ragged, panicked heaves. That left my mother, Vivian. She was still sitting on the floor, paralyzed by the sheer velocity of the consequences crashing down around her. She looked up at me, her eyes red and pleading, hoping for a last-minute reprieve. Evelyn, please, Vivian whimpered, her voice cracking with manufactured vulnerability. We are family. We didn't know Marcus's real estate deal was illegal. Beatrice told us it was a standard legal procedure to protect the estate from taxes. I just wanted what was best for everyone. Don't do this to your sister and me. I stared at the woman who had given birth to me. The fiery rage that had fueled my drive and my late-night audit had completely burned out. What replaced it was a profound, chilling emptiness. I saw exactly what she was doing. She was attempting to rewrite history in real time, throwing Beatrice to the wolves to secure a lifeboat for herself and her golden child. Chloe. You didn't know it was illegal, I repeated, my voice flat and devoid of any warmth. That is your defense, Mom. You are claiming ignorance of federal wire fraud as your moral high ground. It's the truth, Vivian sobbed, pressing a hand against her chest as if wounded. I just trusted my sister. You can't punish me and Chloe for Beatrice's manipulation. You were an eager, willing participant, I said, my words dropping like anvils onto the polished hardwood floor. You didn't ask questions because you didn't care about the answers. You only cared about your cut of the profit. You wanted the payout so badly that you happily helped Beatrice lock your own mother in a miserable state-run facility. You didn't visit her once in 3 months. You just cashed the checks. Beatrice threw your way and packed your bags for a luxury mountain vacation. Vivian opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. She was trapped in the inescapable logic of her own neglect. But even if I could somehow forgive what you did to Grandma, I continued, my voice dropping to a low, lethal register, I will never ever forgive what you did last night. I stood on that gravel driveway, begging for a warm place to sleep for your grandchildren. You sat exactly where you are right now. You had a front row seat to my humiliation. You watched Chloe throw a crumpled $100 bill at my feet, like I was a stray dog. You watched them throw your grandchildren out into the freezing night, and you drank your wine. Vivian let out a strangled sob, covering her face with her hands. The brutal reality of her actions offered no shelter, no room for excuses. She had prioritized her own comfort over the safety of 3 innocent children. You chose your side last night, I said, delivering the final severing blow. My family is in a 5-star penthouse down the mountain. You are just a woman I used to know. Vivian let out a sharp, agonizing wail. I stepped entirely around her, leaving her crumpled on the floor. Exactly. 15 minutes later, the police officers herded the 4 of them out the heavy oak front doors. I stood on the expansive front porch, flanked by Arthur Vance, and watched the physical manifestation of karma unfold under the spectacular Colorado sky. Marcus and Chloe dragged their massive, oversized designer trunks across the gravel. She struggled with a heavy suitcase, her pristine silk outfit now wrinkled and absurd in the freezing mountain evening. They were heading out into the cold. Facing the exact same terrifying uncertainty they had gleefully forced upon my children just 24 hours ago. I did not gloat, I did not wave goodbye, I simply stood my ground. Let's go get the kids. Arthur, I said, a genuine deep sense of peace finally settling into my bones. They have a mansion waiting for them. We spent 3 blissful days at the Aspen Mansion. Lucas, Oliver and Maya swam in the heated indoor pool, roasted marshmallows in the massive stone fireplace, and experienced the exact kind of carefree joy my family had tried to steal from them. But my heart remained tethered to a dismal, state-run nursing facility back in Illinois. On the morning of the 4th day, we packed our bags. The drive back across the country felt entirely different. We were not a vulnerable family driving toward an ambush. We were a highly motivated extraction team, heading straight for our final target. Arthur Vance had flown back to Chicago shortly after the eviction to finalize the legal paperwork and coordinate the rescue. When I pulled my black SUV into the cracked asphalt parking lot of the care facility, Arthur was already waiting by the front entrance. We walked through the automatic sliding doors. The director, terrified of losing his facility's licensing in a federal indictment, immediately surrendered. I walked down the dreary, scuffed linoleum hallway and pushed open the heavy metal door to room 204. Eleanor was sitting in a rigid vinyl chair by a small, barred window. She was dressed in a sharp, tailored navy blue pantsuit, her silver hair perfectly arranged. A single packed leather suitcase sat upright next to her chair. She had known we were coming. "It's about time," Eleanor said, her voice crisp and commanding, her bright, piercing blue eyes landing on me. A slow, triumphant smile spread across her face. Lucas, Oliver, and Maya rushed past me, throwing their small arms around their great-grandmother. I watched the woman who had built an empire from scratch hold the children my family had tried to throw away. "You did it, Evelyn," Eleanor whispered fiercely, her eyes shining with absolute pride. "You took out the trash. Let's go home, Grandma," I replied. 6 months have passed since that drive back to Chicago. Maya is sitting cross-legged on a picnic blanket, attempting to teach Eleanor how to weave a daisy chain. My elite forensic accounting firm, Apex Financial Forensics, is now operating out of a beautifully renovated, high-security wing on the 1st floor of the mansion. I manage the estate's finances with rigorous transparency and absolute ethical precision. We have established new philanthropic funds, investing in local community programs, while ensuring Eleanor's personal wealth remains an impenetrable fortress. The syndicate that tried to destroy us didn't just fail, they completely obliterated their own lives. Marcus's arrogant gamble cost him everything. She currently lives in a tiny, noisy apartment on the outskirts of the city, utterly isolated from the wealthy society she valued more than her own niece and nephews. Beatrice faced the most devastating reckoning of all. Her luxury vehicles were auctioned off, and the arrogant matriarch who tried to lock her own mother in a miserable facility now lives in a highly restricted low-income housing complex, completely disgraced. And then there is my mother, Vivian. When Beatrice's fraudulent empire collapsed, Vivian's financial lifeboat sank right along with it. She was forced to confront the cold, harsh reality of the world she had previously mocked. Vivian now works 40 hours a week at a minimum wage retail job in a busy suburban mall, folding discounted sweaters and standing on her aching feet for 8 hours a shift. Vivian has tried to contact me multiple times. She sends thick, tear-stained letters begging for a second chance, pleading to see her grandchildren, and claiming she has finally changed. I do not read them. I do not reply. I write "return to sender" across the unopened envelopes and drop them back into the mail. I established a concrete, impenetrable boundary the night she watched my children get cast out into the cold. You do not get to abandon us in the dark, and then demand a seat at the table when we finally find the light. Eleanor walks up the porch steps, brushing a stray blade of grass from her tailored slacks, and settles into the wicker rocking chair next to mine. "They are wearing each other out," she notes, nodding toward the boys who are now lying exhausted and happy in the grass. It is exactly how a childhood should be. It's perfectly peaceful, I say, squeezing her hand. Eleanor looks at me, her blue eyes gleaming with sharp intelligence. Peace is not something you just stumble upon, Evelyn. Peace is something you build. And sometimes, to build a beautiful house, you have to be willing to take out the trash. She is absolutely right, and we are never letting anyone take our peace away again.